Claire Bennett smoothed the front of her dress for the third time in the hallway mirror, feeling that particular flutter of nerves that only arrives when something matters more than it seems it should. The late afternoon light slanted through the elm trees that lined her quiet West Hartford street, painting the woodwork in a forgiving gold. Tonight wasn't a casual dinner. Tonight she introduced Adam to the person who had shaped her life. If it went well, perhaps the future she imagined would begin to take a firmer shape. "You look lovely, sweetheart," Helen called from the kitchen, her voice as steady and warm as ever. Claire gave the mirror a small, nervous smile and tucked a stray curl behind her ear. "Thanks, Mom. He'll be here any minute." When the doorbell rang, her stomach did that odd half-flip of expectation and dread. Adam stood on the porch in a neat button-down and trousers that read confidence. He offered one of those easy smiles that could make anyone feel safer. "Ready?" he asked, taking her hand. "More than ready," she answered, and led him inside. The house smelled of chamomile and lemon cookies, Helen's famous recipe, books on the shelves, and the comfortable patina of a life lived quietly and well. Helen greeted them with that kind, practiced hospitality that had always been her mother's way. "You must be Adam. Come in, come in." They sat at the kitchen table. Tea steamed in a pot between them. A plate of cookies winked at Claire from the center. Conversation opened with the small courtesies of first meetings. Helen asked about his work. Adam spoke about his days at a Hartford firm and his hopes. Partner one day, a steady hand at home, a life arranged with care and prudence. He spoke with crisp sentences about stewardship and order, and the comfortable security that came with planning. Claire nodded along, filling in details that would make things flow. At first her mother seemed pleased, smiles at all the right moments, but Claire couldn't help catching the slight cooling of Helen's expression, the way her mother's eyes seemed to be listening for something more than words. After an hour, Adam checked his watch. "We should go," he said. "Dinner reservations." He kissed Claire's cheek, then turned to Helen. "It was a pleasure, Mrs. Bennett." "The pleasure was mine," Helen replied, the warmth in her voice a hair's breadth away from worry as they shut the door. Claire waited in the hall, replaying the meeting. She waited for the gush of approval, the easy praise she'd imagined her mother delivering. Instead, Helen stood by the window, her hands folded around the dish towel, watching the light leave the yard. "He's impressive, polished, accomplished," Helen said slowly when Claire asked. "But Claire, there's something about him. Something cold." "I can't explain it, but it's there." Claire bristled more than she liked. "Mom, he's focused and thoughtful. That's a good thing." "I know you think so," Helen conceded, softening. "Just promise me you'll pay attention." Her voice held the quiet insistence of a woman who had raised a daughter to be careful and still worried anyway. Claire answered too quickly. "I don't need the warning." But as she walked to her room that evening, a small, unsettled spot of doubt had been planted. The next day dawned clear and bright. Claire rode as passenger in Adam's sleek car, watching the city give way to broad, tree-lined avenues and then to the tidy, cultivated spread of the suburbs. Adam's voice beside her was easy. "They'll be fine. They like order, tradition. You'll do well." "I'll be myself," she said, forcing a smile. "That's all I ever asked to be." He looked at her, and there was that small, assessing tilt to his expression that had been there in Helen's kitchen. "Just remember, they're particular. Don't walk on the grass. Don't pick anything in the garden. They offer you what they want you to have. It's their way." Claire laughed nervously. Quirks, she told herself. Old families liked their peculiar rules. And yet, as the gravel drive opened to reveal the Prescott estate, immaculate lawn, rigid hedgerows, flowering beds that formed perfect designs, something like breathless awe mixed with a sliver of unease. The Prescott's house stood dignified against the sky. White paint, black shutters, a porch soft with climbing ivy. A man and woman waited on the drive. Graham Prescott, broad-shouldered and severe even in his 60s, extended a firm, businesslike handshake. Lillian, in linen and pearls, smiled with a surface so polished it nearly reflected back the sky. "You must be Claire," Lillian said, and the words landed like a surface greeting. They walked the garden. Lillian spoke about seasons, about pruning, about keeping paths and beds in disciplined arrays. "Everything has its place," she said proudly. "We built this by careful attention." A neighborhood man wandered up the drive and asked, half apologetically, if he could borrow an air pump to get to the nearest garage. Graham's posture tightened. "You should have one of your own," he said, more sharply than was necessary. "We're having family time." Lillian didn't look up from her roses. Graham's dismissal left a small sting in Claire's chest. The man's muttered apologies and retreat emphasized a boundary the Prescotts kept as rigidly as their hedges. They ate beneath an old oak, a table arrayed with delights from the kitchen and garden, crusty bread, a salad dressed in oil and herbs, cider poured into glasses. The conversation turned to values. "We don't rely on stores for every pleasure," Lillian declared. "We believe in building things ourselves. That takes discipline." Robert Graham nodded gravely. "A family is a garden," he said. "If you let it go wild, it rots. You prune, you train, you maintain. That's how you keep what matters." Claire found herself bristling at that metaphor, at the way the words lingered as a gentle accusation. Adam sat with quiet composure, watching her as if measuring her response. At his side, he was steady. Beneath that calm, there was a precision that made Claire suddenly uncomfortable. The afternoon's idyll fractured with a single sharp sound, a child's cry, high and frightened. A figure appeared at the edge of the orchard. Graham strode to meet him and returned dragging the boy by the collar, no older than 9, pears tumbling from small pockets, dirt streaking his face. "Got you, have we?" Graham barked. The boy whimpered, insisting he'd only taken 2 pears because he was hungry. "You should have better sense," Graham said, shaking the child. Claire felt a hot anger rise in her throat. "He's a child," she said before she could stop herself. "Let him go." Adam didn't intervene. Instead, he crouched, his voice low, cold. "If you ever come back here, you'll find more than a father waiting," he told the boy. He grabbed at the child's ear, twisting just enough to produce a frightened squeal. "Say you understand." The boy sobbed and stammered his compliance. Claire's fork clattered against her plate. The picture Adam had painted in Helen's kitchen, stable, steady, careful, fell away in a single cruel gesture. He wasn't merely strict. He could be cruel, and in a manner that felt utterly controlled, practiced. "Stop it, Adam!" she cried, springing to her feet. "You're hurting him!" Lillian looked at Claire with an expression of chilled condescension. "Don't involve yourself," she said. "We teach consequences here. If you never teach them, they'll grow up soft and useless." "Please," the boy sobbed. "I didn't mean to. I'm sorry." "There's a difference between teaching and breaking," Claire said, seething. But the table seemed to tilt against her. Every cultivated plant, every ordered row of vegetables suddenly suggested a hunger for control, rather than the loving care Lillian had advertised. Graham spoke of calling the police to make a record, he said, to teach him that even small trespasses have weight. In the hush that followed, Claire watched Adam's face, composed, implacable, and somehow pleased. The man Claire believed she knew was gone. Something cold folded into the afternoon sunlight. The garden's perfection, the carefully placed offerings of food and cider, the clipped hedges and the severe hands that tended them, had revealed a deeper truth. The Prescotts cultivated order the way other people cultivated warmth. In that cultivated order, there was no room for mess, for need, for the unexpected blight of human hunger that had simply led a child to steal. Claire felt her mother's warning, "There's something cold," echo in her bones. She had come to meet a future, to be welcomed into a home. Instead, she had watched a small figure humiliated, and a man she loved reveal a capacity for hardness that made her skin prickle. She rose from the table with cheeks hot and a new, sharp clarity. The house, the garden, the effortless refinement, it was all arranged to exclude what did not fit the pattern. The question that pressed on her as she pulled Adam aside was not whether she could live in such a place. It was whether she wanted to. When Graham returned to the table, the boy's small form still huddled. The air tasted different, less like cider and more like an omen. Claire looked at Adam and felt a fissure open in everything she had been wanting to believe. The day had been a test, one that she had not realized she'd agreed to. The test was not of her skill at conversation or her seam at etiquette. It was a trial of mercy itself, and on that measure, Adam had failed. The quiet that followed that terrible scene hung in the garden like humidity before a storm. Claire could still hear the faint hiccuping sobs of the boy as he disappeared beyond the hedge, clutching the small pears to his chest like stolen contrition. Graham dusted his hands as though brushing off dirt, not guilt. Lillian refilled her glass of cider, her movements smooth and unhurried. And Adam simply sat down again, adjusted his napkin, and reached for the bread as though nothing of consequence had happened. Claire stood frozen beside the table. Her heart thudded against her ribs so hard she half expected it to echo off the oak leaves above. "You can't possibly think that was acceptable," she said finally, her voice trembling but clear. Graham's head turned toward her, his expression calm in a way that made it all the more terrifying. "Acceptable?" he repeated. "Miss Bennett, you don't run a household by indulging weakness. That boy crossed a boundary. If you excuse small trespasses, you invite greater ones." "He's a child," she said again, the words breaking like glass in her throat. "A hungry one. You could have given him food instead of fear." Lillian's smile returned, as if she were addressing a guest who'd used the wrong fork. "My dear, compassion has its place, but so does discipline. Order keeps a world from falling apart." Claire's eyes flicked to Adam. He still hadn't spoken, but his expression, composed, analytical, told her everything. He agreed with them. He wasn't horrified. He was proud. The rest of the meal limped on, a grotesque pantomime of civility. Claire pushed food around her plate, tasting nothing. Every compliment she offered met the same polished answers about tradition, structure, the importance of control. The words fell like cold stones into the silence between them. By the time dessert appeared, a perfect lattice-crusted tart gleaming like glass in the afternoon sun, Claire's appetite was gone entirely. She excused herself, claiming she needed some air. No one stopped her. She wandered down the flagstone path that led behind the house. The symmetry of the garden now felt suffocating, each trimmed hedge a wall closing her in. Beyond the orchard fence, she saw movement, a small figure darting through the trees. The boy. He stopped long enough to glance back toward the estate. Even from a distance, she could see the streaks on his face, the raw redness of his ear. When he spotted her, he froze. "It's all right," she called softly, stepping closer. "I'm not with them." The boy hesitated, then took a half step forward. His voice was hoarse. "They do that a lot," he whispered. "If you walk too close to the fence, they yell. They told my brother last year they'd call the sheriff if we came near again." Claire's stomach turned. "What's your name?" "Jamie." She crouched down until she was eye level with him. "Jamie, did you get hurt?" He shook his head quickly, embarrassed, but she could see the tremor in his hands. "I just wanted one pair for my sister. She's sick." Her throat tightened. She reached into her purse, found the granola bar she'd tucked away that morning, and handed it through the fence. "Take this, okay? And stay away from them if you can." Jamie nodded, his eyes wide with gratitude, before vanishing into the line of birches that bordered the property. When she returned to the terrace, Lillian was already clearing the plates with the help of a silent housekeeper. Adam stood near the fountain, his back to her, speaking in low tones with his father. Their posture, mirrored, upright, controlled, made her skin prickle. She realized with a start that Adam wasn't merely like his parents. He was their perfect continuation. The precision in his speech, the careful management of appearance, the hidden cruelty beneath politeness, all of it had been cultivated here, pruned and shaped like the rest of this property. "Everything all right?" he asked when he noticed her watching. The concern in his tone sounded rehearsed, a line he'd spoken before. "I think I should head home," she said quietly. "The drive's long." His brow furrowed, the faintest crack in his composure. "You're upset about the boy." "You aren't?" "Claire," he said, in that patient tone that used to soothe her. "You have to understand how my father operates. He believes in accountability. If people learned there were no consequences, chaos would follow. That was a starving kid, Adam, not chaos." He sighed, and the look that passed over his face chilled her more than anger ever could. It was disappointment, the kind a teacher gives a student who refuses to learn. "You're emotional right now. I'll take you home. We'll talk later when you've calmed down." The phrase, "when you've calmed down," hit like a slap. She had heard men use it before, always as a way to end a conversation they couldn't control. The ride back to Hartford was silent, except for the hum of tires on asphalt. Adam drove with both hands steady on the wheel, eyes fixed ahead, his jaw clenched. Claire stared out the window, her reflection ghosting back at her in the glass. She tried to reconcile this version of him with the man who had held her hand on late-night walks, who had once stayed up talking about art and books until dawn. Maybe that was an illusion too, a performance rehearsed as meticulously as the garden. When he pulled up outside her apartment building, he didn't reach for her hand. "I know today was uncomfortable," he said evenly, "but my parents are good people. They value order. If you want to be part of that world, you'll have to understand it." Part of that world. The words landed heavy. She managed a quiet "good night" and stepped out before he could say more. Upstairs, she peeled off her dress, sat on the edge of her bed, and let the silence fill the room. Her mother's warning replayed in her mind until dawn bled through the blinds. There's something cold about him. For a week, she avoided his calls. Each voicemail was polite, measured, never angry, just firm reminders that they needed to talk things through like adults. On the 8th day, he appeared at her door, flowers in hand, apology ready on his lips. He looked perfect again. Pressed shirt, gentle smile, but the memory of the orchard clung to him like a stain she couldn't unsee. "I was raised a certain way," he said after she let him in. "My family values can come across harsh, but they've kept us strong. I don't want to lose you over a misunderstanding." She looked at the flowers, then at his steady gaze. He believed every word. The problem wasn't that he didn't see what was wrong, it was that he did, and approved of it. "Maybe we both need some time," she said. He nodded, expression unreadable. But as he left, she noticed the faintest flicker of irritation when she didn't promise to call. Over the next few months, Claire buried herself in work at the design firm. The days were long, filled with deadlines and color palettes, but the rhythm helped her breathe again. She tried to forget the Prescott estate, the cruelty disguised as order, but it lingered at the edges of her thoughts. Then one evening, as she closed her laptop, her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. When she answered, a small voice said, "Miss Claire? It's Jamie." Her heart lurched. "Jamie? How did you get this number?" "From Miss Annie at the library. You gave her your card that day." "What's wrong?" Mr. Prescott. He hurt my brother. He said we stole again, but we didn't. My brother's in the hospital. Mom's scared to tell anyone." Claire's hands went cold. Images of the orchard, the boy's terrified face, Adam's calm cruelty flashed in her mind. "Where are you, Jamie?" He gave her an address on the edge of town, near the industrial park. "I just wanted someone to know," he said quietly. "Please don't tell them I called." She promised she wouldn't. When the call ended, she sat for a long time staring at the phone. She could walk away, pretend it wasn't her fight. But something in her mother's voice, in that steady faith that kindness mattered, refused to let her. That night, she drafted an email. It wasn't to Adam or his parents. It was to a contact at the Hartford Gazette, a reporter she'd met months ago while designing an exhibit on local architecture. She titled it simply, "The Prescotts of West Hartford, a story about power and fear." She attached what she knew, the incident she'd witnessed, the patterns Jamie had described, the quiet rumors that circulated among estate workers and neighbors. Then she hit send. What she didn't know yet was how far the rot in the Prescott family went, or how quickly her choice would turn the perfect order of their world into ruin. The reply from the Hartford Gazette came before sunrise. From Maya Ortiz, Investigations. Subject, The Prescotts of West Hartford, a story about power and fear. Message. I've heard murmurs about that estate for years, but could never get anyone on record. If you're willing to talk, I'll meet you anywhere today. We chose a booth at a quiet diner off Route 44. Maya arrived with a legal pad and a calm, steady presence that made it easy to breathe. I recounted the day at the Prescott's table, the pears, the switch, the grip on a child's ear, and then told her about Jamie's late-night call. She didn't interrupt, just underlined phrases and asked for names. When I finished, she closed the notebook and said, "If this is a pattern, someone else will talk. They just need to know they won't be alone." By late afternoon, she'd found them, a former groundskeeper who'd lasted 6 weeks, a housekeeper who'd stayed 8 years because she needed the paycheck and the health insurance, and who still woke at 3 a.m. with the sound of Mr. Prescott's voice in her ears. A delivery driver who refused to bring packages down the drive unless a second worker was present. And buried in an HOA email archive, 3 separate complaints from neighboring properties about hostile confrontations whenever a child's ball went over the fence. Maya asked if I'd go on the record. I said yes and braced myself. Word travels faster than ink dries. 2 days later, I received a text from Adam. We need to talk, immediately. Don't make this worse than it already is. I didn't answer. I forwarded the message to Maya. The story posted the following morning. Perfect order, inside the Prescott Estate's culture of control. It wasn't a screed. It was the kind of clean, sourced piece that's impossible to shrug off. The article described the incident I'd witnessed and quoted Jamie's mother, under a pseudonym, the groundskeeper, the driver. It didn't allege crimes it couldn't prove, but it drew a clear line between power and fear, between order and cruelty. It noted that Adam Prescott, associate at Whitcomb Lyle, had been present. It included the HOA complaints and the police call logs, filed by the Prescotts, urging charges against trespassing minors. The comments filled with outrage. Parents recognized the name from youth league rosters and school fundraisers. A pediatric nurse posted, "I've treated a kid from that address. Bruising to the ear consistent with twisting. We reported. Nothing stuck. It's stuck now." By lunch, the law firm released a statement placing Adam on administrative leave, pending review. By dinner, a second article appeared. A city councilwoman was proposing a review of the Prescott's agricultural tax abatements. If the public orchard functioned as a de facto private fortress, the abatements might be revoked. Money, which the Prescotts respected more than anything, was suddenly on the table. At dusk, my doorbell rang. I knew who it was by the deliberate cadence of the knocks. Adam stood in the hall, immaculate as ever, anger pressed flat beneath his tie. He didn't wait to be invited in. "You've made a spectacle," he said, voice low. "You told a slanted story to people who live for outrage. You've endangered my parents." "I told the truth," I answered, "and your parents endangered themselves. They maintain boundaries. That's not a crime. Twisting a child's ear until he screams isn't a boundary, it's cruelty." A muscle flickered in his cheek. "Claire, listen to me the way you used to, with reason. Chaos is contagious. That family has a name," I cut in. "They are people, not disruptions to your geometry." He looked at me as though I were a stubborn equation. "Do you think the world runs on your softness? Someone has to impose structure. My father taught me that. He taught me to keep what is ours, to defend it." "And who taught you to be gentle?" I asked. He blinked, confused by the premise. Gentleness is situational. There it was, the empty room at the center of him. "You should go," I said, "and don't contact me again." He exhaled through his nose, contained fury, and stepped back into the hall. "You will regret aligning yourself with people who resent discipline. When the dust settles, you'll see how naive this was." I closed the door softly and slid the deadbolt. The dust did not settle, it revealed. Maya's inbox filled with new accounts. A former nanny described Lillian's lesson hours, when children from the adjacent neighborhood were forced to apologize through tears for stepping on the wrong side of a property line. A plumber provided photos of a gate the Prescotts had installed illegally across a public easement, complete with barbed extensions disguised by ivy. A youth league coach produced an email from Robert demanding an opposing team be banned from using the town field after a ball landed in his hedge. The follow-up article landed like a gavel. Within 48 hours, the town inspector posted a notice. Unauthorized gate removal required within 10 days or fines will accrue daily. The HOA board, after an emergency session packed with residents, issued a formal censure and rescinded a slate of privileges. No private security permitted on public sidewalks, no surveillance of adjacent homes beyond the fence line. Parents began organizing community orchard days on municipal land. The Prescotts' perfect geometry met a messy human counterweight. Then the call I'd dreaded and half hoped for came. Jamie's mother, Elena. "He's sleeping," she whispered. "The doctor says the ear will heal. I wanted to say thank you. I've been afraid to speak for so long." "You did the brave part," I said. "Maybe," she replied. "But I kept quiet because we rent month to month. Men like Mr. Prescott can make a landlord think you're trouble." She hesitated. "If anything happens, would you stand with us?" "I will," I promised. "Every hearing, every meeting." And we did. Maya connected Elena with a legal aid attorney who took the case pro bono. The police, with a stack of sworn statements on their desk and a newspaper spotlight on their collar, finally took a full report. The juvenile officer who'd once waved off another property scuffle now asked methodical questions and scheduled follow-ups. Through it all, Adam tried to reach me. Emails, then a certified letter, eloquent, defensive, finally plaintive. When I didn't respond, he tried my mother. She called to warn me, voice equal parts sympathy and steel. He asked me to help reason with you, she said. I told him reason lives at your address now, not his. I laughed despite the ache in my chest. You were right about him. I wish I'd been wrong, she said gently, but I'm proud of you. 1 month after the first article, the Prescotts hosted a closed-gate fundraiser for a judge's re-election campaign. They wanted to reassert normalcy, tuxedos, string quartet, the optics of power. It backfired. At twilight, a small group gathered on the public sidewalk with signs that read, "Kindness isn't trespassing, and kids aren't criminals." Elena stood among them, hands steady. I stood beside her. A TV van idled across the street. Cameras love the contrast of pearls and poster board. From the circular drive, Robert appeared, jaw set, admonishing guests to ignore rabble. Lillian's smile was lacquered so tight it might have cracked. And Adam scanned the crowd until he found me. He looked, for the first time since I'd known him, uncertain. A violin note floated on the air and broke. The following morning, Whitcomb Lyle announced Adam's mutual separation from the firm. The statement cited differences in values. In quieter language, your liability now. The HOA fines accumulated. The illegal gate came down. The agricultural abatements were suspended pending review. Without the tax shelter, the numbers did what numbers do, told the truth. The Prescotts listed a parcel of the back orchard to cover penalties. For the first time, a break in the symmetry opened a view to the road. I didn't celebrate. I breathed. 2 weeks later, Jamie brought me a lopsided pie his mother had baked. We ate slices at my kitchen table. He traced the condensation ring his glass made and said matter of fact, "It feels different walking by there now. Not like a dare, just a fence." "A fence should be a line, not a weapon," I said. He nodded, satisfied by that definition in a way grown men often aren't. Before he left, he looked at the framed print on my wall, a watercolor of wild tomatoes, vines spilling in joyful disarray. "We planted some," he said, "in buckets behind our building. Ms. Ortiz gave us seeds. Send me a picture when they fruit." He grinned. "We will." After they left, I stood at the window and thought about the Prescott's garden, how every stem had been coerced into straightness. Then I thought about Elena's buckets and a boy who now walked past a fence unafraid. Order had not saved the Prescotts. Community had saved us. The last time I saw Adam, I didn't plan it. I was leaving the library with a tote of returns when I nearly collided with him by the steps. His suit was still immaculate. The shine came off the man instead. He had the air of someone stuck between stories, no longer the hero in his own, not yet willing to be a side character in anyone else's. "Claire," he said, softer than I expected. "I wanted to tell you I'm moving. Boston, maybe. I need a fresh start." "I hope you find one," I replied. It was true. I don't wish cages on anyone, even ones they built themselves. He glanced at the stack of children's books peeking from my tote and smiled without irony. "You always were kind." "Try it," I said. "It's not situational." A small rueful sound, almost a laugh, escaped him. "Take care." He walked toward the street, hands in his pockets, a man unpracticed at leaving a place without owning it. I watched him go until the light changed and swallowed him into the afternoon. Then I turned toward the community garden behind the library, where a dozen messy plots made a quilt of green and dirt and hope. Elena knelt between rows, laughing at something Jamie said. A volunteer hammered a sign into the soil. "Share table, take what you need," my phone buzzed. A text from my mother, soup on the stove. "Come by if you're free. Proud of you, always." I typed back, "Be there by 6, then slid the phone away and reached for a trowel. When the sun dipped, and the air cooled, and the first tomatoes blushed into ripeness, I understood what my mother had meant on that first uneasy afternoon. Love and order are not enemies, but love first. Without it, order calcifies into harm. With it, even wild things find their shape. I brushed soil from my palms and looked down the block. Beyond the garden, past the library and the schoolyard, the Prescott fence stood where it should have stood all along, merely dividing, no longer defining, and I went home light.